Good evening. Hello there. I'm just going to read through the latest Telegraph article by Sarah Napton, science editor. I think this is her third or fourth one. It's titled, Lucy Letby, Shift Data was Scientifically Worthless. Statisticians warn. Meeting of experts hears the rotor pattern used to convict the nurse was a, quote, scientific fake, close quote, and other factors could explain the deaths. Absolutely. There was a meeting of the RSS, Royal Statistical Society, on Thursday, just gone. I'll just read it through, see what comes up. Shift pattern data used in the Lucy Letby trial was scientifically worthless, a meeting of the Royal Statistical Society has heard. Royal Statistical Society. One of the most damning pieces of evidence presented to the jury at Lucy Letby's trial was a chart indicating that the nurse was always on duty at the Countess of Chester Hospital when babies collapsed or died. Well, of the subset of the deaths and the subset of the collapses. That's got to be said. That's the, this, it's like, it's like the top of an iceberg, really. How many other collapses are there? I mean, they're not recorded, they're not measured. So what ended up being deemed suspicious collapses, there could have been 100 of those over those 2 years that were simply not recorded. And we won't find them now because they only become recorded for a purpose by Stephen Breary when he's picking them up en route, once the suspicion and the fixed idea that they fix in his mind that Lucy Letby is to blame for. He's focused in on her, and that's why he's collecting that information, not formally, not through the hospital's reporting system, but he's doing it as a sort of project, really, as an individual project. And then, of course, Jayaram comes on board, and then it spreads like a very horrible stain of corruption. The table, which covered a 13-month period between June 2015 and June 2016, showed that while the 38 other nurses were in attendance on just a handful of occasions when suspicious incidents occurred, Lucy Letby was at the scene of all of them. Well, you've got to obviously ask what constitutes a suspicious incident. That's solely in the mind of Breary, which is then underwritten or ratified by Evans later. It's only suspicious because they say it is, and other events, other deaths and other crashes which are not recorded the deaths are recorded, but what I mean is they're not recorded in terms of being flagged up as suspicious. Other deaths are simply deemed not suspicious. That's the crucial issue. That's the fulcrum, really, between the suspicious and non-suspicious. So a chart that then flows from, once that decision has been made, is inevitably corrupted if the basis on which the decision or the view of what is suspicious and what is not suspicious is tainted by an individual who's already got somebody in their line of sight about who to blame for deaths in that unit. It hasn't come out of the blue. It's not completely arbitrary. It's by design, and it's with a purpose and with an agenda. The decision about what is suspicious. So then anything thereafter, because the police join in and say, yeah, that's suspicious, and Evans says, yeah, that's suspicious, CPS says, yeah, that's suspicious, becomes a charge, becomes a conviction. And it all starts, people forget, and the whole system forgets that it began in one bloke's head, Stephen Breary. And then that was added to and confirmed by his little gang that he was building up. And they've just added layer upon layer upon layer upon it, as though it's factual, that those deaths are more suspicious than the other deaths. And they're not. It's only based on his agenda, his say-so. Not as a matter of fact. And that's why the deaths that never reach the trial to be discussed, which I think could be a minimum of 12 other deaths across those 2 years. That's where so much of the information lies that would, if you had access to it all, would undermine all the assessments of the deaths that end up on the indictment. That's what I believe. Okay. However, statisticians were so concerned about the chart that they convened a meeting at the RSS headquarters in London on Thursday to discuss how statistics are used in court cases. I think Richard Gill went to that, which is great. And I'm not sure, I don't know if Peter Elston went. Hopefully they both did. Dealing specifically with the Lucy Letby data, the meeting heard how the rota pattern was a scientific fake, which could not be reproduced independently. What does that mean? Well, it's just artificially cherry-picked cases and data based on an individual's perception that somebody's to blame for what's happening in that unit, rather than all the issues that we've gone over so many times already, or, in these videos I've mentioned, other people have mentioned it, all these issues. It's not... Is it a fake? It goes beyond fake. It's just... To say it's a fake would be to suggest that it's trying to pretend to be real, but it's an absurdity is what it is. It's an absurdity because it's founded on cherry-picked cases that somebody else has decided are suspicious. That's what I keep coming back to. That's the problem with it. That's the foundations aren't there, so it couldn't even appear to be real. So is it a fake? No, it's a lie actually. A fake is a lie, I suppose. Just trying to understand the language, understand what it... Statisticians said there were, quote, issues with the selection and collection of data. Well, obviously, that's an understatement. Used in the chart, and warned there may be many other possible causal factors, absolutely correct, not being considered that might explain the deaths. Well, that do explain them. The next section is titled, well, there's got a quoted part here which says bigger impact than it deserves. The duty roster evidence was described as, quote, feeble and, quote, had a way bigger impact than it deserves, with experts, this is at the RSS meeting, arguing that not enough attention had been paid to alternative explanations, such as the different shift patterns of the nurses, and the fact that, and whether some were more likely to be on duty than others. That's true. Some of them were part-time as well. Other ones came later in the year. In other words, they'd only just joined the trust. It's not comparing like with like. Lucy Letby had been there, employed there as full-time, doing more hours than anybody else throughout the whole period. And then you throw in a nurse there that's just started being employed in mid or sort of early 2016, so it's just not comparing like with like. And there's no doctors on it either, are there? Or no other staff, which is... Originally there were, and then Breary's decided to take them out, didn't he? The meeting, which was held in private under Chatham House rules, when I looked up Chatham House rules, because I was at a meeting. I'd never heard of the term before. Somebody told me it was, well, you could talk about outside of the meeting what was said in the meeting, but you shouldn't say who said it. That's what my understanding of Chatham House rules is. Don't connect it to a name of the person who actually said it, but you can say what was said, what was discussed, but not who specifically said it. Oh, it just says here, house rules which allow attendees to remain anonymous. And the meeting heard that statistical evidence was worthless, and there had been no concrete evidence of a spike in deaths at the hospital. So go back to Dr. Scott McLachlan's Substack that I looked at in the... I keep wanting to say we looked at, but I mean, hopefully if other people are looking at it, then yeah, we looked at in the last video. In August 2023, Lucy Letby was convicted of the murders. Oh, I don't want to read that over again. There's no need to keep reading that. Since the conviction, numerous scientists, statisticians and doctors and ghouls and misfits have expressed their concern about the evidence presented to the jury regarding shift patterns, medical conclusions and the standard of care at the Countess of Chester. Yeah, there's other issues on top of that as well. The police and prosecution have defended the chart, saying it was just one brick in a wall of evidence. Oh, yeah, right. Which showed that Lucy Letby was undoubtedly guilty. That's rubbish. There's no evidence at all. There's no bricks, there's no walls, there's no evidence. There is no wall. There is no wall. Is it in that film The Matrix where, I don't know if it's in The Matrix, where somebody says, you think, well, there is no wall, and you put your hand straight through it. It's one of them. There is no wall. There's no evidence. There's literally no evidence. That's the biggest... That's the level it's at, that there's no evidence. That's what they've pulled off here. They've given an innocent person whole life tariffs, 15 of them, with no evidence. None. Zero. Not bad evidence, not unreliable evidence, just no evidence. No evidence that she did anything wrong. I feel personally that we've got to hold to that reality and not play into the false consciousness or false idea that there was any evidence, it just wasn't very good, or there's reasonable doubt. There's no evidence. There's none. And they would say that, wouldn't they? It's just a brick in the wall. As I said before, like the pillars holding up the roof. As the pillars come crashing down, they say, "Oh well, that we weren't relying on that. That's just we weren't really relying on that for the prosecution." No, it was the rest of it, and then you do it one by one by one, and then there's nothing there. But this isn't just another brick in the wall. It's not a bloody wall. It's never been a wall. It wouldn't hold anything up. It doesn't hold anything up, rationally. None of it does. Speaking about the evidence after the meeting, Dr. Jane Hutton, a professor of statistics at the University of Warwick, said, quote, "It's a large pile of crockery, much of which is broken. Such a pile does not hold water, however big it is." Yeah, that's nice. I like that. That's quite an interesting statement. It's all broken. Much of it's broken. And it's not going to hold water. Well, it's all broken, actually. It's all shards. It's all, you've stamped on it. Or on the crockery. You've stamped on it over and over again. It's not going to hold water. It's not going to hold custard. It's not going to hold anything. It's a pile of crap. It's a series of lies stitched together to give the impression of a whole. Oh, this bothers me. Quote, This is from, I suppose, from Professor. We're not saying the conviction is unsafe. What? Why are you meeting then? We're not saying the conviction. It's obviously unsafe. It's obviously unsafe. I don't like this mealy mouthed stuff. You've just said that the evidence, well, this part of the evidence she's talking about, doesn't hold any water. But the conviction's not unsafe. Is it because she's specifically just talking about this chart, this rotor chart, the data from the rotors? She's not saying it's unsafe, but we consider that if the concerns we are raising are essential to the decisions of the court, then the convictions are unsafe. God, that's a bit of a... I don't want to criticise what they're doing, but it's a bit strange, that. We're not saying it's unsafe, but, and the translation is, if the concerns we're raising are essential to the decisions of the court, why do people have to put things in this circumlocutory... Why do people use words like circumlocutory? In this roundabout way? Why can't they just... What is this? We're not saying the conviction is unsafe, but we consider that if the concerns we're raising are essential to the decisions of the court, then the convictions are unsafe. So he's saying, we're not saying that conviction is unsafe, but if the court considers that our concerns are essential to the decision that the court's made, then it would be incumbent upon the court, to deem the convictions unsafe if they consider our concerns essential. So what if they don't consider your concerns essential? It shouldn't rely. That's what the problem with this is. It shouldn't rely. The truth or the concerns don't become unessential because the court deems them unessential. If they're essential in perpetuity to anyone and everyone. If it's true for everyone and everything. Not just to authority, not just to a body of authority. Do you know what I mean? Am I making a meal of that? Is it some kind of false bowing down and like touching your forelock to the Court of Appeal here, or to say like, oh well, Governor, if you think I got it right, then I hope you do the right thing by it. But if you don't think I got it right, then if you don't think I got it right, then just call me an asshole and kick my ass down the road. Like, is that what it is? We're not saying no. Have some conviction. Of course, they're bloody unsafe. Have independent conviction. They're not It's like you're loaning out your perceptions, loaning out your inferences you've drawn, loaning out what you believe to be the case to say, well, I believe this is... Well, I'm not saying I know this is the case, but if you confirm Court of Appeal through authority it's the case, then it's the case. But if you don't, well, we don't think it's the case. We're not saying it. It's Good on them for doing this meeting, and good on anything what they're doing. But I just don't understand this sort of half-arsedness about the way you talk about it. I don't know. Maybe somebody could explain why people have to use this guarded language. I wonder whether people get to a certain level in their professional lives and they realise, well, when they're dealing with other professionals, they've got to tiptoe around them. I don't have to do that, and lots of other people talking about this don't have to do that. We've got nothing to lose. We're not in those worlds. So I don't have to pussyfoot around it. Don't say this stinks to high heaven. Oh, I'm not saying it stinks. If I go to the Court of Appeal, I'm not saying Court of Appeal that the whole thing stinks to high heaven. But if you think what I've said matters to you, then it stinks to high heaven. But if you don't, then it doesn't. So it's almost like passing over a baton so that authority can change reality. Authority can change truth. And that's the root of what's happened here. And what is authority? When I say authority, I'm in the vast majority of cases, more often than not now, authority is morally bankrupt. It's got no interest in the truth, no interest in justice, no interest in reality. It's pathological. Most authorities are pathological, and they don't care that they're pathological. So this handing over to authority to be the arbiter of truth, that you've sort of suggested, as it were, is suicidal. You need to force them to do the rational thing when they're being irrational, shame them into doing it, force them into doing it, because the outcry is so large and so obvious that it's a miscarriage that they're forced to do it because they don't want to do it. These aren't people of goodwill, the Court of Appeal and the CCRC and the system as a whole. They're not people of goodwill. They're not going to be going, oh my God, have we done something? Oh, we did something wrong, did we? Oh, thank God you helped. Thank God. And I appreciate it so much you put us right. That's the last thing they want to do. They're not people of goodwill. They've got to be forced to do the right thing because it's not inside them. Otherwise, they would have given Lucy Letby an appeal already. And the Thirlwall inquiry would have changed the parameters of the discussion of the inquiry already and postponed it. And it would never have been brought and it would never have got through a trial. We're not dealing with organisations and individuals of goodwill and honesty, of good character. We're not. That's the mistake we're making here. If we think that. You've got to make it impossible for them to not do the right thing because of the clamour against it and that it's so irrational for them to refuse and it's so obvious. It goes on. The meeting heard how similar shift pattern data was used to convict Dutch paediatric nurse and Italian nurse Daniela Poggiali. That's Lucia de Berg, the Dutch paediatric nurse, both of whom were later exonerated. And Richard Gill had a hand in both those, was very instrumental in both those cases. So what a great guy, you know. Statisticians warned that statistical evidence was being abused by the courts in the way that it is used in trials. Yeah, of course, and they're absolutely right. I'm not trying to attack them in any way, but I just think that you can just smell in a way that how organisations seem to have to work. They've got to pussyfoot around other authorities and they've got to sort of be oblique about what they're saying almost. I'm not saying that it's, what's the word? I'm not saying it's unsafe. But if you take on board everything we've said, and take it seriously, then we think it's unsafe. So you get what I mean. It's only if they chime in with it becomes unsafe. But otherwise it's something quite weird about that. Anyway, members of the RSS said they were asking for parity in court cases, with statisticians invited to be present if statistical evidence was shown to the jury. That's a good idea. I hope they will be. Will they be? If toxicology was represented, you would expect a toxicologist to be present, they said. Well, yeah, you usually get one for the prosecution. You don't get one for the defence. And that was the issue here across all the disciplines, wasn't it? Nobody for the defence, even though there was one, but wasn't called by Myers. Very odd, very strange decision. The meeting heard how shift pattern charts had the, quote, potential to spark confirmation bias, well, it's not quoted, it's just underlined, which could taint further evidence. Does it taint further evidence? Yeah, I suppose it taints it in the sense that it just pulls the jury along a nice little track of falsehoods that have started when the choices were made about what was suspicious and what was not suspicious. That's where it started, back in 2015, with Stephen Breary, and then with Jayaram, working in cahoots, building up this 22-page report that nobody's seen, that they then hand to the police about all their suspicions. The confirmation bias is bedded in right from the very beginning. It's baked in right from the very beginning. The further evidence isn't really evidence because there is no evidence against Lucy Letby. So it's not so much that it taints further evidence. That's not correct. All the evidence is tainted. All the evidence is tainted in and of itself. All the evidence is tainted because of the agenda to blame somebody who's innocent. It's marshalled and in support of that agenda, and that's the only reason it's brought in, not because it has any worth as evidence in and of itself. It's brought in a wholly cynical way, an incredibly cynical way. You've got Jayaram waiting 13 months to report something that's emblazoned on his memory, the witnessing of an attempted murder of a baby, saying nothing to anyone officially, 13 months. You've got Breary waiting the best part of a year after being told by a doctor, Dr. Zede, who's on maternity leave, or it pops into her mind that a test reading that she thought was obviously anomalous and wrong, basically a test that's gone wrong, is now correct because it suits the purposes of all those doctors and consultants, suits what they're doing, suits their agenda. But he sits on that for the best part of a year, and then he pretends to find that it's him that's found it. And then that becomes the smoking gun. A test that doctors had seen before and dismissed as worthless, as unimportant. And the babies themselves, F&L, I think it is F&L, it didn't register as a crash. I mean, I've said that before, but now we know that crashes weren't actually recorded in any formal way. What registers as a crash is totally again in the minds of people like Stephen Breary. Not the NHS, not the hospital per se, but just this one guy. That's how they become a thing. That's how they enter into an investigation and into a prosecution. Through him, through the auspices and the mindset and the focus of him. Primarily him. And then in cahoots with Jayaram and the others joining in, like, around a couple of schoolyard bullies, because they can smell blood in the water, and there's some element there that they're enjoying it. They're enjoying it, and they want revenge for the temerity that Lucy had for bringing a grievance. Here we are. I'll carry on. Statisticians also said that there was no evidence of a spike in deaths at the Cancer Chester once the hospital was seen against other similar units, and warned that clusters do happen in medical settings. Yeah. But that's, like I was saying in the video about Dr. Scott's Substack, that's not to say, though, that something wasn't happening in those 2 years that did increase those deaths. It doesn't, just because statistically you can say, oh, well, other hospitals, look at Sherwood Forest Hospital, 13 deaths in 2014. Just because that happens doesn't mean something wasn't happening in 2015 and 2016 at that hospital in terms of a combination of factors, which has obviously got to include infection, a spate of infection, most likely caused by the leaking plumbing and the backing up of the plumbing and the Pseudomonas aeruginosa and the other bacteria that can form under the biofilm of that particular bacteria. And all the issues with the running of the unit itself, the understaffing, the underqualified nature of it, not enough senior cover, the closeness of the incubators, the high acuity, the closing down temporarily of North Wales neonatal units, so they're getting more twins and triplets, which all those factors increase problems and increase acuity for those babies. Where was I? There is evidence of coming last. What's this? There is evidence of coming last, said one expert, but coming last is not the scene of crime. What? I don't understand what that means. Coming last in what way? I don't know what that means. We've already established through the data that Dr. Scott McLachlan has looked at, has found from 14 comparator hospitals, that there were several hospitals. If you took the 4 years as a whole, 2014, 15, 16, 17, there are about 4 or 5 hospitals in advance, and these are similar units with similar amounts of deaths for the areas that they cover. If we take the full 4 years, you've got 4 or 5 hospitals that have more deaths than the Countess of Chester. So, and there are certain years in some of them that just go way beyond what Countess of Chester was experiencing. So I don't know it bothers me when people, I don't know who's made that statement, coming last is not a scene of crime. Were they last though? And moreover, were they last? Were they last in respect of all the other metrics in terms of, you've got to factor all those in as well. I'm not sure how we can do it, because then we're not going to get the data for it. You can say, well, okay, let's say they were last. I'm not saying they are. They're not. But let's say they were. Well, then you've got to factor in what's the staff to baby ratio across that whole period, and how that increases risk. How many sets of twins, how many sets of triplets. And then you've got to somehow measure the element of infection. How do you do that when they're, in all likelihood, hiding the reality of those infections? Hiding it. We know there was Pseudomonas aeruginosa on the taps. Are they hiding? Is that trust hiding that information and it might not be what I've read and heard about Pseudomonas aeruginosa. It creates a biofilm, and other bacteria thrive underneath this biofilm, and it's those kind of pathogens that then get passed on from nurses washing their hands or washing or touching bits of equipment, and then touching babies, neonatal babies that are very, very, in a very precarious state to begin with, and bacteria spreading in that way. In 2022, it says here, the RSS produced a report entitled Healthcare Serial Killer or Coincidence. Yeah, so they did that report. The trial started in 2022, didn't it? The big one. October, wasn't it? To help legal teams present data correctly. The report warned that investigators must always bear in mind that there may be innocent explanations for apparent and even striking correlations between a medical professional's presence and deaths or other incidents. Yeah, that's absolutely right. It recommended that investigators and prosecutors consult professional independent statisticians who could give the instructions to the jury on how to interpret the data. Yeah, that is vital. That is vital. It also advised that confounding factors that could distort the figures should be made clear, but none of the recommendations were followed by the Lucy Letby trial. No, they weren't. So confounding factors that distort the figures. What would be a confounding factor? Well, I suppose all these other deaths that weren't on there. So, but is that confounding it? It's just incomplete, isn't it? It's incomplete, and maybe they mean by confounding factors all these other potential reasons for there being an increase in deaths. I mean, there is a relative increase in deaths, but we've only got, I've not seen anywhere else, we've only got the deaths from the charts from 2013 to 2018, I think it is. I've sent off an FOI today to look further back to see what the trend was for the 6 years before that, because I think that's important to look at as well. I think we need to go further back rather than just the 2 years before these two particular years, 2015, 2016. The meeting concluded by calling for greater collaboration between statisticians and the legal profession in the future. Yes, it's all good. It's all good stuff, and it's brilliant that they had the meeting, and they're saying the right things, in a sense. But I don't know. Yeah, maybe they're speaking as a body, So they're saying as a body. They're not saying representing this body, the Royal Society. We're not putting our flag in the ground and saying the conviction's unsafe, because we can't say that. But if you believe what our concerns are relevant, then we're saying it's unsafe. No, I can't square that circle. I can't square that circle about what that means. It's kind of subjecting your own perceptions to another administration to verify it, to the extent that if they don't verify it, it no longer exists for you. So your statement about it being unsafe either becomes, yes, it's unsafe because they agreed it was unsafe. Otherwise, we don't think it's unsafe. I don't know. I can't grasp it. It's weird. I know something's amiss when your brain goes into a kind of a torsion. It kind of goes like a bloody vortex, because you think, I don't know what's being said there. This is either something important or it's not, and it's important. But what's needed there in terms of, none of it should ever have been about statistics. None of it is about statistics. It's a lie for the prosecution or the police to say, oh, well, that wasn't an important part of it. Yeah, of course they used that. They used that chart, and that chart would have had a huge impact on the jury. It's completely disingenuous. I won't use that word. It's a lie to say that the jury, it wouldn't have affected the jury and didn't affect the public at large when that came out. Of course it did. It was one of their trump cards, one of their aces. I mean, they're playing with a completely bogus deck of cards, but it's an ace for them. In their head, it's. I mean, in reality, it's crap, but it's an ace in their minds, as is the green note written by Lucy Letby, which was her person in great distress and trauma being tortured by really, really bad actors. A series of bad actors, her one-time colleagues and this monster Evans and the disaster of the Cheshire Police, what they are, this monstrosity of this negation of morality that they represented, this void of morality, totally incurious as to whether crimes were committed or not, just like bloodhounds on a scent, and the scent is for the kill. It doesn't matter whether there was any justice in it or not, any reality or any truth in it or not. It doesn't matter. Didn't matter. Doesn't to this day. Won't matter. They'll still believe they did a good job even once Lucy Letby has been exonerated. In other words, they'll pass the buck and say, well, we were told by the expert that it happened. But you could say to them, well, to what degree did you try to falsify it? What exculpatory evidence did you push away? Did you look into those other deaths in any way whatsoever? Did you? When you said it could have been a bad bug in the water, well, what did you do to rule that out then? The answer's nothing. You did nothing. So, it's good, it's brilliant that the Royal Society is involved. Everything's all grist to the mill. And I know there are many ways of speaking about this, and people can't be in the same register as some random person on YouTube talking about it. They've got to go at it with a certain register, I suppose. But I feel impatience at any form of dancing around the houses with these things, any kind of sort of bowing and scraping to these authorities. I think they're bankrupt. I think I look at them with contempt. I look at that Court of Appeal with contempt, and it feels like you want to treat them with contempt. But then I realise, they're not gonna. It's not going to work that way. It's obvious that it's beyond belief. It's beyond simply believing that Lucy Letby is innocent. It's beyond that. For me, it is. It's obvious that it's so obvious that that is the case. It screams at you if you've got the heart and the mind to hear it. It's screaming at you. Anyway, thank you, and all the best. I'll put the link below for this article. It's just one thought comes to my mind is, can statistics disprove what statistics never proved? Can science disprove what science never proved? Can medical knowledge disprove what medical knowledge never proved in the first place? This is like fighting shadows, and the onus seems to be to come up with now proof of innocence, as opposed to, in an ideal world, it would just fall apart because it's worthless. Everything that hummingbird operation did over all those years, everything that Evans did, everything the CPS and the prosecutor did, is utterly, utterly worthless and of no substance, no evidential quality, no evidence whatsoever. Not that it was believable. It's not believable. None of it. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. It's a chimera or chimera. It's a ruse. It's a phantasm, like the phantasm in Breary's head, like the phantasm in Evans's head. It's like a mass delusion, and then you've got to fight that delusion. You've got to fight these shadows now with like solid science and solid evidence. My question is, or my thought is, Does that work? Can you fight the phantasm in that way? Well, it's got to be fought. There's got to be something fought here, and what's got to be fought is the system and the conviction. So perhaps there's more than one way to skin a cat. Not that you want to skin a cat. I don't know, it'd be a horrible thing to do. Just fight it on all fronts. Then I guess, in every way possible, in every way, with every language possible, with every register of discussion possible. Yeah, with that kind of politic language, if you will, and more direct attack in the public arena. So in every possible way, fight it. Keep jabbing at it. Keep slicing at it with your rapier. Whatever the analogy is, but it's got to be brought down. It's got to be overturned. It's got to have almost like a death of 1,000 cuts, essentially, so that it's bleeding out, and then it has to just turn over and expire. And what that means is it folds. The system folds. The system folds because it's been defeated. The lie has been defeated. The phantom. We're trying to kill a phantom here. We're trying to kill something that's already dead. A zombie. We're trying to kill a zombie. This is a zombie prosecution. A ghoul of a prosecution. It's a dead thing, and we're trying to kill it. I don't know if that makes sense. Anyway, take care. Have a good evening. Bye.